Welcome back, everyone, to R2. I'm looking at the wrong side of the camera as well. To R2Kast number 22. Today we've got Karol Devaney. Have I said that right?
You have, yeah. Nailed it.
Perfect. Do you want to say hello there, Karol?
Hello, how are things to the R2Kast listeners? And cheers, Wallace, for having me on. Absolute pleasure. Interesting being on the other side of the mic for a change.
as Karol said, he's a seasoned pro in the podcasting world, and we'll get into that at some point. But he's got the fancy mics there. If we went into that little office of mine, I do have a fancy mic and I've got a fancy camera coming, but I forgot to get the right cable for it all. So it's still iPad on a few boxes, but we're getting there slowly but surely.
Fancy mic while also drinking, like such a mind fuck. Like, is he a pro or an amateur? What is he like? For the listeners, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm just fierce fond of drink.
Just Irish. Is that? So yeah, enough of me talking about technicalities I don't understand. Could you tell us just a bit of background about yourself, Karol? Where are you from, and that sort of stuff?
Sure. I'm from the northwest of Ireland in Sligo, and I'm brought up on a sheep farm. We've always had sort of a few hundred sheep, maybe close to 1,000, I guess. The eldest of 9 kids, so it's a fairly nuts house. It's very busy here. At any time you can hear a domestic over the microphone, but I'll do my best. I've told them to be quiet for an hour, please. Don't kill each other. But it was eldest of 9, brought up on a sheep farm, and was just sort of thrown into it pretty early. I'd imagine anyone else who's the eldest child in a family, they'll know the crack of being really the first in line to do any sort of farm tasks or chores like that. So I did plenty of it from a young age. Dad is a farmer, and he's been a shearer for I suppose maybe over 30 years now. So there were the two worlds that we were thrown into. I think every summer since the age of 8 have been out in the summer shearing. It's kind of all I know, really. And even though I've graduated with a degree now and I have a business, that's sort of shearing is still something I've always done, and I enjoy it. And it's a sport for us as well. So I'm doing it for now anyway. See what happens, I guess. But Joanne Devaney is my sister too. She's the famous one in the family. I'm just kind of piggybacking a wee bit. Probably more people might know her than me.
Joanne the shearer.
Yeah.
I didn't realise it was 9 kids, Karol. Are they all interested in farming? What age is the youngest?
The youngest is 10. So I'm 27 and it goes down to 10, just like a bit of a staircase. But they're all so different. It's a funny one as they grow up now. It's very, like, everyone is so unique and they've got their own things that they like and things they don't like. Some of them are big into it. Some of them have no interest. It's funny, like myself and Joanne be close enough to each other, but there's another sister in between us, Marina, who did a degree in social science, and she's a social care worker now in an old people's home. But people in the farm, a lot of people that are, say, farmers or that know of us, kind of, they don't even know she exists, kind of, or they're surprised to hear that there's a middle one, because she isn't on Instagram or putting up farming content or whatever. But it's just a big difference. Myself and Joanne are big into it. Some of the younger girls are mad to get shearing too. I have a brother who shears, but he's funny. Like, he's a good shearer. He's like has a knack for it, but he doesn't really like it at all. He just kind of does it for money. And he's big into computers, and he's starting a coding course now. So he'll be interested if there's a bit of website development that's needed in unit down the line. So I have no problem with him doing that. But yeah, it's weird. It's funny how you see a sample of 9 humans growing up in the same environment and how, like, utterly different they all are. Like, it's an interesting one. It's funny to see.
It's quite interesting that, I mean, the famous example of a farm with quite a few kids is obviously the Yorkshire Shepherdess, and just seeing the different ways in which they pave their own path on the farm or off the farm, whatever that might be, it's sort of like the whole nature versus nurture type thing, isn't it? It's quite interesting. I have to ask, it'd be rude not to. Who's the best shearer in the family?
Probably, I suppose I'm sort of getting Joanne at the moment, but when she puts her mind to it, and if she's pissed off, like, she's pretty hard to stop. Like, I'm probably just getting her at the moment, but I'm older and more experienced than she is, though. But she's certainly a very good shearer.
Yeah.
There was a period there where I actually switched to my right hand when I graduated in college and learned to shear on the second hand. So she was enjoying that first year or 18 months or so, because she was absolutely hopping the sheep around me, but I started to catch up on her again. But yeah, it's an interesting one. The competitive side of it is good. It's part of what makes shearing fun. Like, I seen you were talking to Cammy, the sheep game, on an earlier episode. I listened to that one, and it's funny when people are into shearing, they're pretty into it. And if you're outside that world, you kind of look at how hard a work it is, and they think, what is going through their heads at all? But when you get, it's a kind of world when you get into it, it can be addictive enough.
Yeah, I'm pretty well known back home for we were on a sheep farm as well, for being the guy that's always like, right, gonna get into shearing this year, and then shear like 2 and think, nah,
yeah,
I'm this size for a reason.
Yeah, it's a big commitment though.
For sure, yeah, major. So you spend most summers shearing. What's the sort of the remainder of the year involved in your life then?
Yeah, I suppose it's just sort of shaping up at the moment. When I finished school, I took a couple of years out, went to New Zealand that time, went working in Norway, played rugby in New Zealand for a while, and shore there for a while. Took a couple of years out, sort of to figure out what I wanted to do. And then I bit the bullet and I went to college in 2015. And so I did ag science in UCD, specializing in food and agribusiness management. It's just sort of, it's a good broad course. It's be fairly well known up there, or in the Irish sort of ag space anyway. But the FAM side of it was more like the most businessy one out of all of them. And I've always had an interest in business and marketing and just money and finances and economics. I kind of half interested in all that sort of stuff. So I thought, so that course made sense for me to do. So did that in 2015, graduated in 2019, was a 4-year course. I knew when I was finishing, when I finished, I was going to go back shearing again and give it another rattle. So 2019, that was when I switched hands. Actually, it was just in May, just finishing, did the summer shearing, picked up the cert on the 2nd of September, and was in Australia by the 6th or the 7th of 2019. Just didn't delay, just picked it up and had a night out with everyone else and away with me. Then went out there, and that was sort of 6 months out there. And then COVID came along then while I was out there, and I was actually lucky enough to get home. Just got home, left, decided on the Wednesday, I guess it was around 17th, 18th March, that I kind of need to get out of here, I'll get stuck, and just left, booked a flight home on the Saturday, sold my car cheaply to some Irish girls, some local girls that were staying over there, and I just got home. And apparently even the next week it was very hard to get out of Melbourne, because it was just sort of, everyone was just sort of rushing around that time. It was a weird time. Like, it was because, like, you hear, like, I remember hearing like a few times over the years that, oh, there's this kind of pandemic or something's come out of Asia or something like that, and you just kind of don't really pass any heed of it. Like, and I remember a couple of weeks before I went, I was just shearing away, and I was chatting mum and dad over the phone, and they were saying, geez, this coronavirus is kind of getting bad enough. Like, maybe you should think about coming home? And I was thinking, nah, I'm in the country in Australia. Like, sure, that's the safest place of all. Like, I was thinking to myself, the worst place you'd want to go would be an airport, like, because it's so busy and people traveling from different countries. But once we seen on the news that they were on about, it just kind of came all of a sudden one week that Australia were thinking, like, flights are being grounded and they're thinking about closing the country. And then I kind of thought to myself, then now it's time to go, like, or else we'll be stuck here. Like, so, and there's the summer shearing at home. Like, Ireland is still my base. Like, it's still the number one place. So, got home anyway, and was lucky enough to get home, and then I've been here since.
It was, I mean, you say it's a strange time, and I feel like I've said the words "it's a strange time" so many times. It really was, though. Like, I mean, it went from they're talking about this disease, like, and it's just a cold, to, like, 3 weeks later, like, you cannot go next door. It was surreal. Like, so surreal, and the way it impacted some people, and I had quite a few mates like yourself, somewhere out in the States, somewhere in New Zealand, whatever, and it's like, oh, we'll just wait, it can't be that much of an issue. Like, 2 days later, I'm getting back. Like, it's scary times. So what did Australia, New Zealand, and Norway do for you? Was it all shearing or?
Yeah, I was pretty interested in rugby back when I was 21, 22. So I played rugby out in New Zealand there the first time for a while, but when I went to college and played a little bit in UCD, I was all right at it. It wasn't great, like I was but I was only okay at rugby, and obviously that's a hugely competitive sport, and they're all huge. Like I'm only kind of an average size bloke, and I was sort of starting to win some trophies in the juniors and the intermediate and shearing, so kind of stuff. So I'll stick to that. Sure, it'll get me through college anyway, and it did prove very useful. Like it suits perfect. Like you have the summer shearing to pay for Dublin, and it's all needed because Dublin's an awful expensive city. So yeah, that worked out, and that's how I was doing it. In terms of out foreign, I definitely coming out this time. I was pretty focused on like cracking learning with another hand, because it was sort of it was a big deal. Like I just sort of made the decision to switch, and I was already kind of a good enough shearer, like a senior shearer, maybe up at Cammy's level on my left hand. I suppose we can get into a little bit of why I decided to do the nuts thing like that. But once I had decided to do it, I thought to myself, like, there's only one way this is going to be done, and that's sicking myself with sheep and shearing, and just be really disciplined and put as many hours on the handpiece as possible. So, like if you're a shearer and you want to get to a high level, like I don't know, you've probably heard of like the 10,000 hour rule with skills like that. That maybe 10,000 hours or roughly 10 years before you get to an extremely high level or close to world class and something. So I was just had that in the back of my head. Is like if I go to Australia and New Zealand, like I'll have the whole 12 months shearing versus just 4 months in Ireland. So that just makes complete sense. And it did work out that way. It's kind of, I was talking about it with a friend over there. It's nearly like, because Australia at the back end of the year is sort of the busy time, like from September to Christmas. Then you can sort of go out to New Zealand, do a big season out there in like winter and into spring, and then come home to Ireland or wherever you are in the Northern Hemisphere. And it's just like getting 3 seasons into one season, really, 12 months instead of 4 months. So if you're serious about your craft, which I certainly was at the time, it was before I was doing any podcasting or e-commerce slobbering. Like that just made sense for me to do that. So I done that and was out there for the 6 months until March or so, when the whole global pandemic kicked off.
The listeners on the podcast for this, Karol, are split. There's quite a lot of people in farming that are just wanting to hear about people in farming and hear some stories. There's also quite a lot of folk that really don't know much about the industry and want to learn really what's happening. So you mentioned you could maybe talk about sort of the jump of hand from left to right. Could you tell us why you did that, why that was a big thing, and what was involved?
Yeah, sure. I've been doing shearing competitions since I was 18, and at the lower grades anyway, there's 4 grades in shearing competitions. There's junior, intermediate, senior, and open. So I was always like, I was naturally kind of a clean enough shearer, like as in I do a good job, which is very important for the shows. So it just kind of had a natural knack for that, more so than speed. I'd be cleaner than I would be faster. But when you're in junior and intermediate and you're only shearing 2 or 3 sheep at a time and you're very clean, you can kind of do quite well. So I suppose it's nice to probably just got some early success at it, made a nice few finals at lower grades and stuff. So I just kind of got to like that. It was something I was passionate about. It's like, it's class getting up in front of a crowd and having a good shear. And when I don't know, like for people, if you've never been at a shearing competition, some of them are pretty busy. Like in the UK, some of them are huge too, and even Balmoral and the All Ireland, if you get in a good location. And it's there's a great high out of it. Like if you're up there and the commentator is going and there's a real race, like it's such a, I don't know, it's just a I suppose everyone's kind of got their fix of something that gives them a rush, and that's where I was getting my rush for sure. So I kind of knew that, and even through college, like doing them in the summer, that I enjoy doing these competitions. Like these are fun, and you can I've seen plenty of shearers doing them till the age of 50 or that. So I was kind of I was thinking to myself, sure, this is a great sport. Like you can actually have a really long career at it, and just have a lot of enjoyment, and win some trophies. But the stands, the way it works is that they're nearly all right-handed stands in most competitions, and particularly the ones out foreign, like out in Australia and New Zealand. And as a left-hander, I would have to pull them out and turn them around and shear them, and I would be finishing away from the porthole where you're meant to put them down. So it takes about an extra 5 to 6 seconds per sheep to do that. A commentator described it as starting in a 100-meter sprint, turn face the other way starting. So if you think you're against Usain Bolt, you'd like to be starting in the same direction as him, at least, if you have any hope. Like, so it was grand at the lower grades where you're only shearing 2 or 3 sheep and it's a bit slower. When you get up to the higher grades, you're shearing 10 sheep in a senior final and 20 sheep in an open final. And you're against some of the best shearers in the world, like Ivan Scott and Matt Smith and all these fellas. Like, they're all there at these UK shows. So I was kind of thinking to myself, there was one particular period where I made an Irish team, a senior test team, to go out to France, and we'd out there, and it was just at the start of fourth year, my final year in college, and we had a great time out there. It was like got to go out and represent the country. As a senior test, we had a test against France out there in what was it, Le Poitiers or one of these places, a lamb show, but like that, went out there, and it was all right-handed stands, at like a 4 stand, like we say, a four positions for shearers to shear on in this competition, and they were all right-handed. So I made the final in it in the seniors, but when I got on a good few sheep, things went wrong, and I ended up finishing last in the final. And I kind of just, like, that, it really hit me that time. I was kind of thinking to myself, I quite enjoy these competitions, like, and I'm probably going to do them for a little while. Like, I could be doing them into my 40s. Like, do I really want to be hampered with this, with the left hand? And then I was kind of thinking to myself, maybe, like, I could try and switch, and I could just do one, like, have 1 or 2 crap years, but maybe get back to where I was, and then sort of the rest of the time, then I'll be so glad that I did it. I sort of sacrificed the short term for the long term. This was kind of thinking to myself. So it was in my head that I would do it once I finished college. I was kind of thinking about it before the end of college, but UCD and Dublin is so expensive that I just had to have all guns blazing in the summertime, and I couldn't afford, like, the switch, because it'd be a big financial hit too, like, because you'll go back to doing whatever 70 or 80 sheep a day. So, but once I got out of UCD and I was finished, I said to myself, well, okay, I'll be able to eat anyway, because I have no college course to pay for. Like, so then I just decided to do it. I just finished the final exams, started in May, and yeah, that was an interesting summer, because we have a business here at home, and I've been sort of coming out since I was a young fella, and I was going around to neighbors and locals, and they're like, they've seen me shearing for years, and they know I'm kind of a good enough shearer. And I was turning up to these farms and I was shearing to my right hand, and they didn't really know the difference. And, like, they must have thought I was on drugs or something, because
what's this guy doing?
There was a New Zealand girl shearing with us too that came over to do a season, and Lexi Phillips, and she's very good too. Like, if even on the left hand, would sort of be a tight enough tussle, but she was doing like 3 to my every one. Like, I was nicking the sheep, they were getting up, and it was just absolute carnage. I was shearing out in my cousins. This is kind of a funny enough story. I was shearing out in my cousins. This was one of the first farms that me and Lexi went to, and it was just like that. It was just so ugly to watch what I was doing. Like, and Lexi was doing about 3 to my every one, so she was just making an absolute fool out of me. Cousins looking at me like, what's going on with this fella? And I actually cut myself then with the shears, gave myself a good dirty nick on the finger, and so I had to go into their house, and I had to, like, and the blood was like running out of this, and I was in the bathroom by myself cleaning the kitchen. I just kind of looked at myself in the mirror, and I was like, what are you doing? What are you at? Like everyone that you're graduated from college, like, everyone else is going getting jobs, doing the normal thing, and here's me trying to switch and start from scratch again at 25 as a shearer. Like, and it was just one of those, it's the mental thing. Like, it was just a bit of an ego hit. Like, I'd always sort of, like, like, everyone, like, there's so many things that you can't do, and there's so many things that you suck at, but, like, and you kind of base your identity maybe, or your ego around certain things. And, like, if there's one thing I could do at 25, is, like, I could shear a few sheep decently well. So take that away, and it was kind of like, what have you got, So it was, it was an interesting, it was a real mental game, and it was a head fuck. But it's funny how if time passes and you stick with it, it just slowly but surely comes with practice. And we're probably as good now, if not better, with the right hand. Fast forward about 2 years or 2.5 years.
Well, that's what I was just going to ask. How do you compare the day before you jumped over to going right-handed to compare to what you could like now?
Yeah,
the same.
I suppose a couple of metrics, like there's competitions, maybe how well you're doing in them and at what grade, but we don't know that yet because there's been no competitions for the whole of COVID and more or less the whole time I switched. So we don't know that. But the other way of looking at it is tallies, what you're doing. How many are you shearing in the shed per day, and what's some of your best ones for the season? And in terms of tallies, I'm kind of back up, or maybe how many you're shearing per hour on average. So I'm sort of up to kind of 35 or 40 an hour now, which is sort of what I was doing on the left hand. Maybe not even as much as that, So like in my mind, that's a successful switch. As regards when Balmoral comes later on this month, that'll be a very interesting one. That'll be over now by the time this episode comes out. But now it's 31st of August. Balmoral will be in late September. Be more or less the first competition that I've ever done on the right hand. So that'll probably won't go that well for the first one.
Don't put yourself down. Don't put yourself down. That'll be That'll be good for the commentators. Actually, be a good narrative to run.
yeah, it'll be interesting. Hi, I'm sure I'm just one cheer, and there'll be a whole bunch of them up there. But I think people will just be delighted to get back to a competition, get back doing what they like to do, and just the whole community around it too. Like yourself, like with the ag space, and then the shearing one is like a smaller, even more cozier community. And there's people there that'll be in different parts of the country, or in the UK, or even in New Zealand, Australia, that you're good friends with, but you'd only see them at shearing competitions or shearing events. So it's cool to catch up, and you'd always catch up a few times a year. But the last 2 seasons, it's just been on Facebook, really, just watching what they're up to. Yeah, you haven't really seen them, so that'll be nice.
You mentioned about the sort of atmosphere and whatnot in a shearing shed at these shows. I mean, my experience is Les Mahago once, but the Highland show a few times. It's just brilliant. Like, I would advise anyone, if you're listening, in farming, I don't have to tell you, or out with farming, give it a shot. It's probably quite daunting at first. It's very hectic. There's a lot going on, but what an atmosphere if you can get involved. You mentioned there, Karol, you're sort of in the 35 to 40 an hour. Is that right?
I guess, yeah. It depends on the shape. Like, you could get ones to be better, and you'll go up a little bit. Maybe if you're on bigger ones, might be a little less. But yeah, that's on average what I'm doing now. I suppose 35 mark.
So assume average, like what mules, something like that. Is that probably a average shearing size, or is that? I'm not.
Things. Yeah. So maybe not as many mules here, but they're getting more popular now. Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm.
What sort of amounts would like the top level shearers be doing an hour?
Yeah, that was interesting. I just did a course last Saturday here with a fellow who's a very good shearer in the southeast of the country, Wexford. Roy Collier is his name, and he's Roy be about 50 now, I'd say, and he's sort of just not. He's taking it a bit easier than when he used to. But the fellow that shears with him, who's on the Irish team along with Ivan Scott, Dennis O'Sullivan. He was on about Dennis, and he says Dennis is doing 50 an hour now, more or less, all the time in the shed. So I was even talking to another fella on the course. We were talking about what goals he wanted and what we want out of, say, this course and going forward. And even when I was telling farmers I was going down to the course, they're kind of like, are you going to taking it? Or because they see you as sort of as good a shearer as they've seen maybe locally or up there, because they haven't maybe seen all the top shearers, and they're kind of like, what more do you have to learn? Like, you're able to shear, but it's kind of just like, it's sort of, how do you get from 35, 40 an hour up to 50? Like, that's sort of the level I'm at and where I'm trying to get to now. And that's sort of, I suppose it's like anything it's the law of diminishing returns. You're probably going to have to do a lot more work to get from 40 to 50 than you do to get from 20 to 30. But you can work hard obviously, and you work hard in the shed too. Like, the harder you go, the more you'll shear. But like at that level, Roy actually told us on the course, he says you can do 40 an hour working hard, but to do 50 an hour, you have to work smart. Like you've got to actually build a pattern and really think about what you're doing in terms of like each blow you put in, how much wool that's taken off, and how efficient you are, and how it kind of all goes together, like, and how just has to be really smooth, and yeah, just efficiency is the main thing. Having what's called a good pattern, like that's what you sort of call it, that with the shearing. The best way to describe a pattern is probably because let's say when you're shearing a sheep, if you're shearing a couple of hundred a day every day, you're sort of doing what you're doing it in the way that you've sort of trained to do it, and that's sort of a set of habits. Like that's probably a good way of looking at it. It's like a set of habits that take you from pulling out a sheep with wool on it to letting go a sheep with no wool on it, and your pattern is sort of your set of habits. And if you want to get to a higher level, then you sort of have to change your set of habits and maybe adopt some of the blows and the shots that like higher, better shearers are doing, and kind of learn off them. And that along with just sickening yourself with sheep and just spending hours and hours and do thousands and thousands of sheep, you'll hopefully eventually get there, I guess. Yeah. So that's what I was looking to do. Did I answer your question? What was the original?
The original was just like how many world class are doing, and
a lot of them would be sitting on 50 an hour day to day in the shed. I know some people have seen some of the records that have been done where they're doing astronomical numbers, like Stuart Connor. I had him on my podcast earlier on this month, and he did 872 in 9 hours. But Stuart would probably do, like, I'd imagine he'd be like a relaxed enough, like 50 an hour man normally in the shed. Like maybe on a mule he'd be able to do 100 a run, they actually call it, because like a run is like a 2 hour run, and most shearers will sort of shear for 2 hours before they go for a break. So you're trying to ton up is the term, like where you're trying to get 100 for the run, which is basically 50 an hour for 2 hours. So a lot of shearers would be around that 100 a run mark, some more, some a bit less, but that's sort of like there, or maybe a bit above that is where the top level is. And then the records then are just sort of where everything comes together and everything is optimized. The shearer is like really well trained, and the sheep are sort of farmed for it, and like the best lambs that you can sort of get your hands on, but they're still not that necessarily that easy shoring, because like they have to make a wool weight, so they've got to be pretty woolly, and they've got to have there's all very strict rules of records. But like say if Stuart does 872 for that record, he's not going to do that day in, day out, but at the same time not taken away from it's an absolutely incredible tally. And he bet an Irishman by 5, Ivan Scott. He did 867. Ivan is just I've been very fortunate to shear a bit with Ivan, maybe like a couple of days a year, because he doesn't live too far away from us. And it's class really, because like he's a legend in the shearing game, and he has the 8 hour record still. He had that 9 hour one, and he's won the All Ireland maybe, I don't know, it must be about 9 or 10 times at this stage. And he's been in a couple of world finals. He's been in the last 2 world finals, so he's just like one of the best in the world. One of the best to ever pick up a handpiece. So it's certainly a privilege to be friends with him and to shear with him. It's kind of I don't know how you describe it really. It's sort of, you're sort of a local football player, but you just happen to live close enough to, I don't know, like Messi or Ronaldo, and they can kind of come and train with you a couple of times a year, like, and you can sort of sicken them with questions and try and learn, but certainly very fortunate to be friends with good people and some good mentors, which I'll hopefully now kick on and hopefully get 50 an hour within the next couple of years. We'll see what happens. We've got other irons in the fire too, no more than yourself, Wallace.
I mean, I guess that's sort of like Harry Maguire will be feeling at the minute with Ronaldo going to Manchester United, but no. Yeah. I mean, that jump from 35 to 50 is worth, what's that? Assuming a 60 a week, 10 hours a week, 900 quid a week. It's not just I want to get better. It's I made a lot more cash in the pocket.
Yeah, for sure.
We've sort of covered everything shearing wise, and you've mentioned uni. And one thing I meant to ask you, Do you guys do dissertations?
We did a thesis, a final year thesis. I suppose the dissertation is kind of just the big brother of a thesis, is it?
It's the same thing. Bigger. I mean, you could, I think they're the same as far as I understand.
Yeah, I'd imagine a dissertation would be longer though. Our one was kind of like 7,000 or 8,000 words. So while I suffered with it at the time, but I was probably just making a big thing out of a small thing, because I've heard of a lot bigger word count since then. I suppose if you go, there wouldn't be a lot of dissertations. Yeah, if a dissertation or a thesis is the same thing. Some courses that we did ours for final year, but it was only about 7,000-8,000 words when the whole lot was together, references and all. There'd be some bigger ones maybe if you go on and do a master's or a PhD. I said there'd be some pretty big ones then when you're getting up into comfortably into the 5 figures in terms of word counts. But so they exist. Like, it depends on the course, really.
I was just what was your thesis on then? What did you do that on?
I actually did mine on wool. I just basically I can't remember the title off the top of my head now, but I just sort of examined what research there was out there on wool and potential marketing opportunities with it. That was sort of the gist of it. I picked that because I'm a farmer, a sheep farmer and a shearer, and I've been interested in wool. Looking back, there was probably easier ones to pick because there's like not really a whole pile of research on wool, and there's not a whole pile on Google Scholar, and anything that is on there is kind of maybe 20 or 30 years old. So it definitely made me think, cheapers, like there's really, looking at it when I was doing it, kind of seemed like it seems like wool is just sort of abandoned here, really. That when I kind of thought to myself, it is like, farmers know how interesting it is, how good it, how good of a product is, how it's renewable and biodegradable and just like fire retardant, and like sort of where farmers are well aware of all the good points of wool, but it seems outside of that, maybe it just seems like there's not near as much of a buzz as potentially there could be. But
there's a lot. I mean,
you can't really tell the market what to buy or what to be interested in either. They sort of just do their thing. Like, the market is the market is the market. So, but yeah, that's what I did mine on.
It's a good one, and it needs talked about. I put a post up on Facebook about. I couldn't tell you. It must have been at the start of July. It was 214 animals shorn. So there were some tups. There was mostly yows and a few hogs. Sorry, the other way around, mostly hogs and a few yows. And 214 was going to be, I think it was £82. And it went semi-viral. Like, it went out to 150,000 folk, but so many people were messaging me and saying, like, that can't be true. That, like, you falsified these figures. And I'm like, I have not. If anything, I added 20% on just in case, because I didn't want to falsify it.
Yeah, just to be conservative, like.
Yeah, exactly. And you've mentioned all those benefits there, all of which are true. And one that we don't talk about often is wool's about 58 or 59% carbon. So when that's taken off, that's a huge sequestration that's sitting in those bags.
Yeah.
The potential for insulations and stuff are limited at the minute because there's a big push for houses to be vegan, and okay, I get that, but it's a shame in a lot of ways.
That is a thorn. I feel like that is a thorn in the side. It's like the one sticking point that would stop people that are obviously that are into the environment and into becoming more sustainable. There seems to be a bit of a stickler, like the fact that PETA have decided now that wool is the devil, and that shearing is killing sheep or skinning them alive. There's such misinformation out there. It's ridiculous. Like, you've probably seen it. I'd say there was one photo that it was like an ad that PETA did that where it was just, this is what happened for your wool fleece. Yeah, it was like a lamb that was like skinned alive, like.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's some neck, like, but yeah, obviously there isn't enough rules or enough laws there to stop that from happening. But
the media is lawless, isn't it? Media really is lawless. It's dangerous.
Well, the internet is probably still a new enough thing in terms of legislation, because from what I see, legislation seems to move very slowly, because it takes takes all the time. Like there has to be like it has to be enough of a pain point usually, and then they'll talk about it and argue about it, and maybe 10 years after that, there'll be like legislation. Whereas the internet is a fairly new enough thing. If you take it out a bit, it's been here for a few years now, but in terms of legislation, they probably haven't fully got on top of it. They are starting to now, like, but that's just absolutely criminal. Like, it was a bit disheartening to see as a shearer, like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's amazing how well funded they are and how many people got on the bandwagon in terms of PETA. But if it's the case where there's people who, it kind of comes down to maybe not being educated about the farm, and I suppose why it's so important what you're doing and what we're doing, and trying our best to just sort of get the information out there and get it out and maybe bring people closer to like the farm in terms of just become more knowledgeable about it. But I suppose that one is so outlandish. Like, probably surely a lot of people notice like that. Well, that's nuts. Like, sure, we've seen sheep being shorn, like, and they just like the wool is taken off. Like, it's good. Like, it's if it's done right, like, it's just no harm to the animal, and it has to be done. As I've said in a couple of interviews, like, it has to be done for the health of the animal. Like, they'll get eaten alive by maggots if not. Like, so,
absolutely, and PETA, for those that don't know, listening in, guys, PETA is a big company, and it stands for, well, it's not a company, it's a charity, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And I would go as far to say their principles are correct and fair. It's just the activism thrown in that's a problem. There's a few different organizations like this you might come across, like HSUS is the Humane Society of the United States, and CIWF, Compassion in World Farming. They're all sort of pushing the same narrative that we shouldn't be, we should have high welfare standards for animals, all of which we all agree on. all livestock farmers are people for the ethical treatment of animals. Absolutely. It's when it becomes this far-fetched, stupid stuff that it's sort of unsustainable, really. But just in case you're wondering what we're talking about there, the wool thing, from a welfare perspective, you said that wool's the enemy, wool's the devil. I can't remember exactly what you said, Karol, but something like that. It's so true. And when I did my master's, I did a module on food security. And there was about 30 of us in the course, and about 7 of us were either not against agriculture or in agriculture. The rest were sort of against it. And I did my ethical conversation on wool, and I was looking into a PETA publication, and there's a photo. It's just 2, as you'll know of well, shriveled up bits of shit that have like a bit of wool on them. That's sort of like, it looks, the reason I'm going to say it looks like testicles is because what they were saying in this publication was quite often testicles will be shorn off. And I was sitting there thinking, like, this is just nonsense. The farmer doesn't want that, because if they've still got testicles on that animal, they don't want them gone. Quite literally, if you're looking at it thinking we don't care about welfare, that sort of thing, then you've got to consider that. But we could go down that road forever, and we could sit here arguing. But it's worrying, and I think it's good we're pushing that narrative, like you say. One
spin-off advantage is that, like, and yourself, Wallace, like, there is people in both the shearing industry and the farming industry that mistreat animals and have no regard for animals. Like they're out there, like they're the 1% or the 2%, but they are out there. So if it makes people more conscious, and even makes us stop and think, well, and question things and say, well, is this the right way of doing it? And then just be happy in the fact that we're doing the best for the animal, then I suppose that's a positive thing. True. But I suppose what really gets me is that sort of there's a bit of a disconnect there, where there's, I suppose, we're not all farmers like we used to be 100 years ago, and there's maybe people in cities now, and that they're not that educated on the farm, on where their food comes from. Like there's, I've seen some funny stuff online, but people thinking that like food just originates in the supermarket. I know it's a big world, I guess. Don't know how you can think that's the case, but Yeah, but like it's annoying when say PETA gets to them maybe first before the season farm and stuff. And I suppose the thing to have on their side, I think I said that in an earlier podcast of mine, was that they can do the shock thing that sort of grabs people's attention and make them go, oh, like that's horrible or whatever. And like it takes 10 pieces of good educational farming positive content in order to outweigh that, like, because it's just human nature, isn't it? Like if there's a big lovely positive charity event going on the right hand side of the road, and there's an accident with an ambulance and fire brigade on the left hand side of the road while you're driving through, which one are you going to look at? We're wired to immediately look to the sort of the crazy thing or the bad thing or the negative thing, so they use that to their advantage, and it takes a lot of good work to outweigh that. But look, sure, what can you do? Just keep fighting the good fight, I guess.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us are. I think we're, as an industry, we're sometimes guilty of really not fighting that fight and not defending our own product. But I think with social media and COVID has worked in our favour, I think, which is kind of unfair to say. It sounds like you're profiteering from it, but it's not that. It's just people are realising the benefits to sort of sustainable food production, and I think it's working in the right way. But as I said, we could sit and talk on this for forever. I've got a couple more things I really want to cover with yourself.
Yeah, for sure. You don't do 3-hour ones like me, so we better hurry up.
I try and time them a wee bit. I don't mind if I go over an hour here or there, but I try and limit them somewhat. Not that I don't want to talk to you, I promise. If you're listening here to Karol and you listen to agricultural podcasts quite often, probably heard his voice. I just out of interest before we started this, went on Spotify, typed in farming, clicked on podcasts and show, and Unit was first. I've done it a few times and it's always sort of been around the top 10. I'm unfortunately not in the top 30, but still.
You deserve to be more than me, mate. You're being a lot more consistent these days than I am. I've done one about in the last 3 months, which is absolutely horrible. But when it comes down to, so there's a big lesson learned this summer, that summer is crazy. Have as much. So that was the big lesson for this summer. It's just like have as much stuff printed and as much podcast done in the wintertime when you have the chance, and have enough that can sort of tick over without too much work, because the summer is like it's great that you can work for sort of 4 or 5 months and have like some money in your back pocket, but in that 4 or 5 months it's very busy and it's a tough physical job. You don't have much energy for much else. But
maybe I'm the opposite. I'm the lazy side. I had 7 weeks off because of the nature of my job, so I was able to catch up a bit more. So we'll put it down to that. But the reason I'm saying this is Karol's got a big podcast, and you'll see it on his hoodie if you're watching on YouTube, and instead of listening sort of on Spotify. That is the name of the podcast, and it's also the name of his business, which we'll get into in a minute. But could you tell us about the podcast, Karol? Maybe why you started it, some interesting guests, that sort of stuff.
Sure, yeah. I was thinking back, I was talking to my sister Joanne about it, and I was messaging her from Australia saying that a farming podcast would be a good idea. A lot of funny, the couple of things that I have started a lot of the time, it's like taking something that I've had an interest in some other industry and maybe starting a farming version of it. And for me, I was at the time I was just hooked on the Joe Rogan experience, Joe Rogan's podcast. Obviously, that's one of the biggest ones in the world. And for starters, he just seems to have drinks with his friends and make tens of millions of dollars in revenue every year. So that looked like great crack. But obviously, it's always the case where on the surface stuff looks so easy and fun. But it also just seemed like he was he just seemed like he was having a lot of fun with it. People were really responding well to it, and me myself, I loved it. I was very inspired by his success, really, and his mindset that sort of from a young age he just decided that he just sort of pursued his passions, and stuff didn't work out for a long time when he was younger, but he just kind of just kept going and kept going, and stuck it out, and he ended up in a very good place. Now he's an ultra successful person. But so from that I was kind of thinking a farming version of the Joe Rogan experience would be fun to do and it'd be good. So the perfect time for it was coming home from Australia with the pandemic and just being at home, not going out drinking at the weekends and having this extra time. and energy, and you're twiddling your thumbs wondering what to do with yourself. So I just started the podcast in about April of 2020. I think it was actually early May when brought my sister Joanne on for the first episode, and yeah, just sort of hooked into it, and I did it weekly for most of 2020, which was pretty crazy, because the with a weekly podcast, the week it comes around really quick. It's nuts. Like it's doable. Like people do it, but I guess I don't know. Maybe I'm not hard enough for work, or I'm not on the ball enough. But it was great. It's amazing. We've had some big enough names on in both the shearing worlds and the farming worlds, and I've made some good friendships from it, and I've learned a lot from it. I've learned a lot listening to talking to smart people on it, and it's been really good. Like there's it's a big commitment, as you know, Wallace, but there's definitely advantages to a podcast. Like it's a very effective networking tool. Like it's a really good way of getting to know people and getting to talk to people. Like I've sort of some of the people that I've got on. When I kind of think back to people in the farming space that have started to be big enough names, Dr. Mark Ferguson over in New Zealand, Dr. Shane Conway, Tommy the vet, people like that in Ireland. And these are people that are just maybe 20 or 30 years deep into a career in the ag space, and way further along the line than me, and have done way more work, and have earned sort of their place. And like for me to just be able to bring them on my podcast and talk to them and learn from them and network with them, like having only started a podcast a couple of months before, is just it's a crazy thing, and it's a privilege, and it's an honor, really. And it's funny, like if you could not know someone, but people like talking about themselves, and they like talking about telling their story. So maybe often you'd surprise yourself. You'd be surprised that someone who you would think wouldn't have much of an interest in coming on the podcast would be interested in coming on. And then you can go from not knowing a person at all to, like, it's funny how you can kind of create quite a bond with a person from talking to them about their life for a couple of hours. Like, and like afterwards, like we'd be sort of engaging on social media, and they'd be commenting on your posts and that, and haven't gone from not knowing you at all, so these people that I'd look up to, both in the shearing space and the ag space. In the shearing space, we've had a couple of world record holders on, and just people that are just far better shearers than me and far better known in the industry than me. But I've sort of gotten to know them now, and would be well acquainted with them now just from having them on the podcast. And like delighted to have had the opportunity to do that. And yeah, it's a fun thing. Certainly no regrets starting it anyway. But yeah, just sort of hooked into it. And I guess looking back, probably an advantage. I would always be naturally sort of a perfectionist. I would get hung up on details and having things exactly right. But like from looking at maybe entrepreneurs and podcasters and people that create content, one lesson I've learned is what they all say is that just get into it. Just like put up the first couple of episodes, and like have put a real value on time and trying to get good quickly. That's sort of how I approach shearing too. So when it came around to starting the podcast, one thing that people who don't know, that people will get very hooked up starting the podcast is equipment and having the audio right. And like I did give it a crack. Like I had a look at mics on Amazon and stuff, but I was absolutely knew nothing about audio or technology or anything like that. So eventually I just got sick of it, not knowing whether or not to spend a couple of £100, and I just started with Skype and a pair of €10 earphones on the phone, and kept doing that every week. And like it was amazing. Like we got thousands of downloads with that same setup. It was nearly like a thing of pride, like that I wouldn't change it, for maybe the first 6 months or that, because the people were still listening, and they were getting on. It was getting on fine, because I think the content is more important than the audio. While you do want to have the audio well, there's no point getting hooked up with the audio and that wasting a couple of months when you could have done 5 or 6 episodes in that time and have continued to get good. I suppose the bottom line is that I knew from shearing, knew from trying to get good at anything, was that you're going to suck at the start. So just get through those first few episodes and learn what needs to be learned. And just, I think it's the title of a book we were talking about before the podcast. I love the saying is ready, fire, aim instead of ready, aim, fire. Just take action first and then see what happens, because like people would be, is it kind of the spotlight effect where people think that, you know, you put out something online and you're so afraid to put it out and you think that everyone's going to be looking at it and critiquing it, but people don't care all that much, not as much as you think anyway. They're just kind of doing their own thing, like, and they're just kind of saying, oh, he's got a podcast, oh, and they might listen or they mightn't. So when you're in those early stages of anything, no one really cares that much anyway. So let that be the time when you take as much action as possible and get good and get comfortable and figure out the learnings that you need to learn. So that was one thing that certainly helped me in terms of the podcast, was just taking action and seeing what happens. And that was sort of the story of the podcast anyway. Fast forward 18 months or so, and yeah, we're doing what we're doing.
How many have you done? Just out of interest.
46 or 7 now, I think. Right. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Because it's kind of, yeah, I suppose it's a satisfying feeling when you can get another number up there, you know yourself. You're well aware yourself. So yeah, it's nice. Get it up to 246 then, and we'll see what happens. Might be a little bit smoother at it.
Exactly. What's Joe Rogan's at 1750 or something at the minute?
That's nuts, yeah. And he does 3 or 4 a week. Like, it's.
I think he does one every weekday. Does he not?
Yeah, near enough. Yeah, I think I was kind of keeping an eye. There's one thing when I first started, and I was sort of, my big thing was, you know, just getting the episode out there, and I'd be looking at these other big podcasters and saying they're like, and I'd be looking at Joe Rogan, it's like, oh wow, he's put up 5 this week, and I've only done, and I missed this week or whatever. Yeah, but it's crazy, and they're so good. A lot of them are so good too. Yeah. But
as far as I know, you don't have 100 million Spotify contract though.
No.
it's maybe you do it
next week. Well. It's in the works. I just didn't want to say it yet, Wallace.
But yeah, some of the stuff he puts out is excellent. My girlfriend and I have been listening to the one with Yeonmi Park, who's a North Korean escapee, and oh my god, that country is, I don't swear in this podcast, but it's fucked. Like, it's absolutely ruined.
Shit show.
Yeah, absolutely. And but he wasn't the first podcaster I listened to. The main one I listened to is True Geordie. I don't know if you know of. But,
I do. Yeah. He's big into MMA too. That's another thing about me. I have a big interest in the UFC and MMA. Conor McGregor probably brought me there, but I've stayed because I like the sport. And yeah, I've listened to True Geordie. He's good. He's very good. Nice, relaxed interview style.
Yeah,
that's another thing. Kind of, you know, when you're podcasting, you kind of listen to some of them, trying to figure out tips and how, or just sort of figure out a style. You know, like, do you want to do a real structured and rigid like TV, or do you want to be drinking in the middle of it like Joe Rogan?
It's interesting to see the differences. I really like Lawrence as a podcaster. I know a lot of people don't. The reason I actually watch True Geordie is I watch a lot of YouTube. A lot of sort of like, you know, sidemen stuff, farming YouTube, a lot of it, and he has a lot of them on, so it's quite interesting. But the reason I'm saying this is he once said in a podcast, he was talking to there's another podcaster in the YouTube scene, and he was like, yeah, starting up, as you're saying, get it out there. Nobody cares if it's not perfect if you've just started. And you know what, I'm on podcast 22 at the minute. It started on the 14th of January, and we're now, I think this will be 12th of November this is coming out, and I'm still doing it on an iPad. And yes, it's probably not perfect, and I hope next year I've got some graphic designers on board and stuff and get the right mics and that to make it better. But at the end of the day, folk listening in, they're not focusing that highly on that sort of thing when they know it's just a lad from Sligo like yourself, or a lad from Ireland who's having a chat with folk about something they're passionate about. But the views thing's an interesting one. I mean, it sounds like you're getting quite high views. I think I've probably had in total about 4,500, so not huge, but
nothing major really.
Getting that break.
To be honest, like I think maybe about 20,000, but like, it's been going for longer, and it's been, you know, and I've more episodes, like, so it's not a crazy amount, you know, for sure. But it is, I suppose it is the farming space too. So like the total audience is going to be a bit smaller, but yeah, I suppose you can get quite hung up on the audience and how many people are downloading it. But yeah, I suppose the way I sort of think about it is just go down the rabbit hole and just try and get good. And I feel like if the product is good, and I sort of try and approach the merch and unit the same way, just really put in the work and try and get the product really good. And then like if a product is really good, or if content is really good, it should nearly market itself, because people will tell other people like this is really good. So put most of your time into trying to improve that and just getting better as a podcaster, putting on better or getting better guests on. And that I'm saying that, and I'm haven't been doing too many recently with the shearing, but we should have a good winter of it now, hopefully.
For sure. It's a really interesting space, and just seeing it. And the farming community is a pretty supportive bunch. We sort of club together, don't we? But your podcast is called Unit, which is, for those listening, it's like yow as in sheep and knit as in wool yarn, whatever. It's called that for a reason, though. It's been named after something, and a lot of people in farming, diversification is a massive thing these days. Whether that's going into renewables and tourism and sort of the new sectors, going into YouTube and social media, that sort of thing. A lot of these people that are in social media offer merchandises and stuff like that, but you've sort of done it the other way. You've sort of really aimed onto merchandise specifically. Could you tell us just a bit about Unit itself and how it began, Karol, and where it's at now?
Sure, absolutely. Unit's actually a couple of years old. I actually started it in 2018. So I was in third year. For a bit of context, I was in third year in college, and I had just started my placement, which was back here in Sligo. I wasn't in Dublin. And I kind of was just an office job, but they didn't have a whole pile of work for me. I had a good bit of time spent in front of a laptop, but not a whole pile to do. So I've always had an interest in business and marketing and digital marketing. I thought when I found out about the space, I thought it was really interesting. It's just kind of cool to sort of the whole thing of creating content and running ads and search engine optimization, and that I quite enjoy that. I find it interesting. So I suppose what better way to really sink your teeth into that sort of thing than to start a business. And obviously I'm a mad passionate farmer, and the best way to sort of unite both of those interests was to start a business in the farming space. And I thought to myself that a clothing brand would be a good place to start, and come up with the name of Unit and got someone to design a logo. And got a few sales and got a little bit of traction that time, but nothing major, and had the summer shearing and then final year of college. So I paused the store. So it was a Shopify store, and I just sort of shut it down and just kind of thought to myself, like, I might come back and do this after college, even when it was shut down and I was in college, sort of like every couple of weeks there'd be a message saying, hi, I tried to go in and buy a hoodie and I couldn't do it, or whatever. Like just regular, like people would be messaging about interesting about hoodies. And so it was kind of in the back of my mind that, what a business, when you start off, you kind of think a big thing is like, is this something that people like is there a demand here? Like that's a big thing, because before you go invest a lot of time and money, you're sort of concerned, like you're like, is this worthwhile doing here? So when I kind of seen that Unit certainly seemed to resonate, or people seem to like the branding and seem to like the idea of the brand, I kind of thought to myself, like, like it seems to be, people seem to like it and farmers seem to like it. So like, that's an opportunity. That's a bit of a stroke of luck. So I should like capitalize on that, So it was kind of in the back of my head that I would give Unit a crack, really. And you're supposed to, again, no more than the podcast, like what better time to do it than being stuck at home and not going to Australia or New Zealand. So I started the podcast then while sort of thinking about Unit and getting starting on the website again. But the podcast was originally the R2Kast Farming podcast. So I started the podcast sort of separate from that. Got a good few people on, got sort of networked with a lot of people with good followings too, like influencers over here. And so I suppose that was a good thing too, because it sort of drew a bit of, and that 6 months of work definitely between that and Joanne going very well and getting a lot of traction for YouTube and getting on in the papers, and she was on the news a couple of times, that certainly maybe got people more aware of what we were doing, and just maybe the Devaneys in general. As I say, just piggybacking on Joanne again. But so I was sort of, unit was in the background, and I relaunched it in November of 2020, just about a week before, and I didn't really think it was a big deal at the time, but it was about a week before Black Friday and the Christmas season, which is like the busiest time of the year for all things e-commerce and all things sort of clothing and presents or anything like merch in general. So like just had a sort of a whirlwind month where it just took off and done a whole pile better than I thought it would. So just like all of a sudden then I'm like, all right, I'm a business owner then. But it's class. It's awesome. It's we had the podcast then and the brand going together, but still separate. And that was kind of annoying me then for a month or two, because I was kind of thinking to myself, well, I'm doing this on my own. And you know, like building a recognizable, legitimate brand is kind of a big deal. So I'd be probably better start with one at a time first, rather than trying to build two together, you know, because the R2Kast had its own separate brand and its own separate logo. So I made the decision then to rename the podcast the Unit Farmer Podcast. That was the route I took, where like the podcast would still be the same podcast, but it would sort of be helping to build the Unit brand. And it's working out good, because, you know, say on Spotify, like Unit is on Spotify now, and the logo is there, and it's the whole thing is helping in terms of business to get the brand out there and just be recognizable. Isn't that the whole thing about building a brand? So in terms of how the podcast and the brand fit together, I guess I would see myself as a sort of a business first, but then the podcast is kind of a content arm of it, I guess. And it works out well, because sure, like, you know, say on the Unit Instagram and Facebook now, I'd be putting up podcast clips and videos and quotes and pieces like that. So it really helps in terms of the social media plan and the calendar, like getting stuff out there. And then it's just getting the brand out there in terms of because it's sort of offering value to people up front for something that's free, and maybe making them become aware of Unit, and then hopefully they'll see the brand and get to like the brand then. So yeah, the two work well together. Yeah, it's interesting. It was well pointed out on your part that I something I thought about myself too, that if you look at the likes of Cammy and the Sheep Game and plenty of others, that they'll build the content side first, and then the products will sort of come from that as a way of monetizing it. For me, I guess I'm just sort of building a brand separate from me, and I'm kind of trying to build a business that maybe one day will sort of be a legitimate business that can kind of run without me. I guess that's the plan there.
Absolutely.
Maybe something like an asset that could be sold or that, because I suppose that's kind of the plan with it, really. I just kind of want to build a business, as opposed to not running down like the likes of Cammy or anything like that, because they're doing phenomenal. Like, they're doing a lot better than me at the moment. But that's kind of the way I decided I want to do it. I just love marketing, very interested in business and digital and how all that space works and content and whatever, but at the same time quite enjoying the podcast. So just riding the wave at the moment and having fun, just working hard, but doing what I like to do in terms of doing what I'm passionate about. So I'm very lucky, and don't realize how lucky I am, really, to be honest, at times. When you're in the middle of stressing about getting the next episode out or running things or keeping on top of things, as you know yourself, Wallace.
Yeah, what more can you ask for than doing what you like doing and still be able to have a living? Just quickly going to turn this light on. Not that it's ever a walk in the park. No matter what you do, it's going to be tough and there's going to be challenges. But I suppose if you can work on this, I like working for myself. Like, that's one thing I noticed about that. Like, I have no problems with working hard, like from shearing or farming. That's just the way you have to be. And like, there'll be plenty of long, hard days doing a very tough job. You know, even I was over on Achill Island there yesterday,
And then we were shearing from 9 until 9, I think, and maybe I did about 270 or something like that. Topping, like shearing halfway up, like leaving wool on, which is a bit slower too. So it was a painstaking day, like, but it's just if you can get through that and survive, you become someone who can work, you know. And it's a good trait to have for sure. But like you have to be not afraid of work, definitely, if you're working for yourself. But I guess the good thing that, you know, you can work hard, but it's on your terms. That's one thing I like about it, that you can take a day off if you want to. You know, you don't have to ask a boss or whatever. There's something like, people get lured into it, and they think that they won't have to work. No, you'll have to work harder. Like if you don't want to work, you're probably better stick to a job, like, because and you won't have the added stress and the constant hum in the background of having your own business, like it. But it's certainly rewarding. It's things that I'm curious about, and it's challenging. But I suppose I'm supposed to be the kind of person that's up for a challenge too.
Absolutely.
Good.
Yeah,
Keeps you out of the pub briefly.
Yeah, I mean,
just drink at home instead. on Zoom.
It's cheaper that way, isn't it? No, it's no, absolutely. I mean, that drive side of things is almost all of the battle. I mean, I get asked quite a bit, how do you get the time to put into Realty Kitchen and all that stuff, and I'm kind of in an easy position. I've got a pretty good job, and being able to have a side thing on the go is much easier when you have security. But jumping into like you have working for yourself, there's a lot of benefits, but it's got to come hard work.
Drives, doesn't it? It takes work, but just for people too, don't be under any illusion that I'm this bulletproof person that doesn't feel any stress and can always work. Like, there's plenty of days when you don't feel that motivated. Plenty of days when you feel like, am I doing what I'm supposed to do? And you look on LinkedIn then, and like people that graduated along with you, they're like the senior management executive at some big company, and the LinkedIn profile looks class, and you're there slobbering at home, farming and doing a business. But like it's fun though. It's fun.
Yeah.
And it's think the long term too, I guess. Like, just kind of start building something, and hopefully in a couple of years it'll turn into something.
Yeah, there's a lot of what do you say, respect to be stowed in that, really, isn't there? It's been great to chat though, Karol. We've really sort of went around the houses. We've covered your life in shearing, and probably went more in depth in shearing than I have with shearers past on the podcast, which is really good. Sort of always been around shearing and stuff, understand the sort of technique of it, but not really fully understand like maybe grading systems, that sort of thing. So that's been really good. I always end the podcast with 2 questions, and you've kind of already answered one of these because you've been pretty philosophical throughout and given tips to people coming into it. So it's normally, if you had any tips for folk coming into the industry, what would they be? And also, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Into the farming industry.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could do that. You could go into e-commerce, whatever you like, really.
I suppose there's principles of success, really, that if you're going into anything, if you're going into any industry, well, I suppose don't be afraid to work, you know, don't be afraid to put in some hard graft. I suppose if you're starting anything, if you're starting shearing, if you're starting a business, even if you're starting farming, at the start, you're like, you don't really know what anything really. You don't even know what you don't know. It's just like you're very far away from where you probably want to be. So, just take plenty of action. Don't be afraid to work. And the other thing is that like people admire that, you know, and that if you go work for someone, but you have heart, like, and you won't give up. People admire that, and people like working with people like that, because, you know, when the going gets tough, they're not going to give up. You know, they're going to stick it out, and they're going to stick with the team. Particularly, I noticed that with shearing, but with farming too, and then with a business, like, and particularly if you're in a business with someone else, or if you're working with people that are ahead of you, and you're trying to maybe learn off them or something. That's kind of leading into the second very important point, which is like mentors is very important. Try and find people as high up in the industry as you can find them, or that are getting the results you want to get, and just try and model it as best you can. Add value to them, and try and just sicken them with questions too. There's a great quote I read it a couple of weeks ago. Oh, it's definitely some artist has said or something, but the quote is life is short but art is long. As in trying to learn how to do something or get mastery in something takes a long time and it's a messy process, but at the same time is ticking, and in my mind mentors can cut the learning curve and maybe leave it that you'll get to somewhere, maybe get to where you want to get to in 3 years instead of 5 years, which is hugely valuable. It's hugely valuable because it's saving 2 years, of working on something. And like say with shearing, getting to 50 an hour within 3 years instead of within 7 or 8 years fumbling around by yourself before you finally decide to take that course or that. So don't be afraid to work. Look for mentors in any of those things, and stick at it too. Persistence, and it's something that I wouldn't have came to me naturally. Something I'd fall down on, particularly when I was younger. I would just I'd have great inspiration for something at the start, but a couple of months in, whether that's like a gym program or anything like that, I would sort of, once the inspiration dies down, I would quit at it. But as I got older, I began to realize that anything of real significance or anything that you want, if you want to accomplish a goal really worth talking about, it's going to take a few years. It's going to if you're starting off in shearing and you want to be an open shearer, that's going to take, on average, that's going to take 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So be persistent, stick at it, because often success was just one hump of the mountain away, and it'd be awful to give up before you're about to get to the next level, so persistence. I'm kind of telling myself that too, stick at it in terms of unit, the podcast and all that, and shearing, because all the rewards in anything, in any industry, come in the later years of something, when you have a good network built up and you know what you're doing. And say with shearing or whatever, for example, when you're a fast shearer, that's when you're making the most money, when you're doing 50 an hour, not when you're slobbing around doing 20 an hour. But in order to get there, you have to be persistent. So they're the 3 things I would tell myself, and I would tell anyone else, really. Seek mentors, work hard, and stick at it, and be persistent.
Brilliant. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Where do I see myself in 5 years?
Caribbean one mojito, something like that.
Probably, hopefully doing what I'm doing now. I suppose back to that original point that it just takes years in order to get to a good level of something. So I would hope that I'd still be shearing in competitions, and I would still be building unit, because I know myself, if I stick at it for 5 years and keep at it, then it'll both of those things will be in a better place than they are now. Just because they nearly have to, really. So I would hope that I'm doing exactly what I'm doing. If it's the case that life happens and you have to make a switch, then so be it. But looking forward from here now, I would hope that'd be the case, because knowing that it takes that length of time to get good at something, really.
Excellent. Very good.
It was a pleasure coming on, Wallace. Thanks for having me.
It's been a deep episode into a lot of philosophy here and there, and a lot of really good stuff. The core
is light. It definitely is.
we should
core is heavy, they should call it.
It's very much not that, I must be honest. But good stuff. Appreciate having you on, Karol. And if you want a boring old lecturer on, I'd be happy to come on to you. But
wait on the message, mate. Wait on the message. I suppose there's a great thing about podcasts too, and you can sort of collaborate, and maybe a couple of followers might enjoy what I'm saying. Most of them will probably be turned off and think he's talking absolute muck. But even if there's a couple there that enjoyed it,
mate,
they pop over, and then hopefully a few of mine pop over to you. That's the way. It's a win-win thing. It's great.
The fact no comments of you shearing this beard hasn't come up is probably a good thing. But really good having you on, and we'll keep in touch. Yeah,
pleasure. Thanks,
cool. Catch you later on, and cheers for everyone for listening.